this film in my head, it all started with the landscape actually. So it started with me wanting to shoot, and looking at this landscape and say, okay, I guess this would be great for a Western. Well, I guess Westerns are part of our cinematic culture. I guess I grew up watching a lot of films and watching a lot of different genre films, and Western was definitely one of the most impressive ones, I guess. And I always wanted to make a Western.
Ainda por cima vêm armados. É matá-los. É matá-los já.
There was never really a script, as in the strict sense of script writing. It was more of a map where I knew where things were going and how things were going to happen. So it's more of a confluence of different things that I wanted to put inside the film, as in to tell a story of this specific period of Portuguese history, comparing it to nowadays, and also to use Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau inside the film. And what I wanted to do in this story is that the main character, which is influenced by the West more than the film itself, that was the basic idea. So the main character would be somebody bringing American culture into his own country's culture, and he would bring it from this philosophical and from this fight of human rights point of view into Portugal of the beginning of the 20th century, which I don't think it evolved that much actually, so that's why it turns the film into a nowadays situation.
Why did you choose specifically this period, the beginning of the 20th century in Portugal?
I guess it's a very intense and very important period of our history, which it's not used in cinema. It's a period between when the king was killed. There's 2 years between 1908 and 1910, when they killed the king, and then when Republic was established in Portugal. And those 2 years are managed by the only survivor of the royal family. And actually was a period, a very interesting political period, where anarchism was on its hype. And there was more than 30 organized, well, it's not parties, political parties, but organized groups, anarchists, like over 12 periodical, like newspapers, anarchist newspapers. And I thought it was quite interesting to make a small tribute to those people who changed the course of the country in a very, well, it was much more intense how people's beliefs were put in practice.
The author you mentioned, the philosopher Henry Thoreau, spent part of his life in solitude in the wilderness, the same as the main character of your movie. Is it a mere coincidence, or is it a kind of tribute?
Yes, I guess there's a lot of small tributes to his life and his story in the film. Of course, this main character is not Henry David Thoreau, so the idea was to put him in the same attitude towards life of building his own house and living by himself. And then the difference is he's translating into Portuguese civil disobedience in this cottage in the middle of nowhere in front of a big lake, frozen lake in Lapland, Finland.
Was your idea to encourage people to be more disobedient in face of bad governments like Thoreau did?
Well, I guess my idea of disobedience is not really grabbing a cocktail Molotov and throw it in somebody else's car, but I guess it's more of I guess what we need is at least more political commitment in everyday life. I guess it's more of a need for us to express exactly what we feel and how we feel, because democracy is much harder to fight against it, because you're fighting against yourself, because you're part of it, either you want it or not. Either you vote for somebody or you just don't vote at all. You're part of it. And that's the difference between fighting a monarchy, like in the film, or fighting a dictatorship like we had since the 70s. But because that's much easier. You can see it, who your enemy is, and you can focus on that and you can fight that. And nowadays it's much harder to fight yourself. And then I guess that is the problem of our generation, to solve their own problems with democracy. So I guess there's no other way than make something.
Mas é isso. Não fomos nós, esposa.